we'll get started. Thanks everyone for coming here. I'm Alex Wood and I'm a Director of Strategy and Transformation at Cloudera. So I am a strategy consultant by training. So what that means is I've worked with a lot of different businesses in a lot of different industries on data-led transformation and strategy projects, helping them get value from their data. At Cloudera, what I do is I support our largest customers, building business cases to make sure that they're getting business value from the investments that they make with us and our partners. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to drive value with a hybrid cloud strategy. But before we dive straight into hybrid, I would like to, I'll wait for this to come up. I'd like to talk a little bit about what's driving the shift to cloud in the first place. I'm not sure this is going to come up. Anyway, we see 7 things as the main things that our customers tell us are driving the shift to cloud. Number 1 for all of them is agility. Everyone wants to be able to quickly analyze their data, wants to be able to do things very quickly, wants to be able to break that procurement cycle where a line of business wants to do some analytics, goes to IT, waits 6 months to procure servers, provision them, install them. We want to get the ability to get that value from that data right there and then. Another reason is the economics of it. So there can be big savings made from cloud. If you have a lot of underutilized equipment on-prem, you're paying all of the upkeep costs for data centers, for staff costs, for running costs, and if you're underutilizing them, that can be a lot of wasted money. Sorry. The other big buckets are about tooling and about remediation of legacy apps. So everyone wants to have the latest tooling to do their analytics. They want the latest BI tools, they want the latest analytics tools, and they want to move with those as the tooling changes over time. And in a cloud world where you are only using the tools that you want, you're only paying for them when you want, you don't get tied into long-term contracts for something that is in now but not in next year. Finally, the last point I'd like to dwell on is something that is often forgotten, and that is skills. And in an increasingly complex data world, we're finding you need more and more skills to manage your larger and larger, here we go, it's back up, more and more skills to manage your ever-increasing number of different projects, softwares, increasingly complex hardware demands, and one of the big allures of cloud is that you can remove the need for this ever-increasing pool of skills. The vision is that you self-serve to end users, they can point and click, they can access the latest technologies without worrying about what goes on the back end. Now, to an extent that's true, and it's definitely true if you're wanting to run, say, a single Spark job. But as soon as you start to want to have enterprise-grade security and governance, and you want to integrate multiple components from those cloud environments, it suddenly can get quite complicated. And you find that instead of reducing the investment in skills, you're just shifting it. Now that can be a plus or a negative, but it depends exactly on your situation. And across all of these, there's an underlying trade-off with many of them between on-premise applications and cloud applications. Security versus agility, these sorts of things. So traditionally, when you speak to organizations about their deployment strategy, it's what's our single deployment strategy? Do we have a data center on-prem where we install our data platform on top and we have our apps running on top of this? Do we have it on IaaS? So do we get some of the benefits of cloud? You lift and shift that same stack onto someone else's infrastructure. You can turn it on and off when you need it. Or do you move to a fully cloud-native solution where you stitch together truly cloud-native apps? And by cloud-native, what I mean by that is cloud-native in architecture, so separation of compute and storage, rather than cloud-native as in Amazon's particular solution or Microsoft's particular solution. Problem with any of these as a single deployment strategy On-premise is not strategic. It doesn't get a lot of the strategic benefits about agility we just talked about. IaaS, it gets some of the benefits of cloud, but it doesn't get all of the separation of storage and compute. Yes, you can turn it on and off, but you're not getting all of those strategic benefits you get. And cloud native, well, the cloud native offerings are still maturing. They're getting there. But if you have to retool an on-prem app into a completely cloud native architecture, those costs can be quite significant, as we'll see later on. So what do we say the solution is? We say a hybrid cloud strategy is the solution. With a hybrid strategy, you have one unified control plane with a unified set of data governance and data security that goes across all of your environments, regardless of whether that be on-prem, be on IaaS, be that in one cloud vendor or another. And you build your applications in a way that can cut across all of those. Then you have to decide how you deploy your workloads. And so we say that we use a workload deployment matrix that effectively says, how important is this app? How persistent versus ephemeral is this app? What's the cost-benefit analysis? What are the strategic implications? So for high-value, complex apps that are using highly sensitive data and are business-critical and are persistent, keep those on-prem in your data centers you've already got running and stable. But as you start to get more ephemeral workloads or medium-risk apps where you do want to have some of the benefits of elasticity, start to consider moving it into IaaS. And for net new workloads, you should architect those in a cloud, be that a public cloud or a private cloud architecture from the outset. So we talked to quite a lot of customers about this strategy, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about what the benefits we've seen at some of those have been. This is from one particular large financial services customer that we've worked with, and these are some of the business benefits that we realized through a hybrid strategy over a pure on-prem strategy, and we'll come on to a pure cloud strategy later. 19 to 37% cost reduction. The range is because they haven't fully been realized yet. And that's primarily around workload optimization. This is reducing the amount of excess compute when you've got servers that are not being fully utilized. There's also about prioritization of what goes on-prem and in the cloud. Service improvement, this is actually an FTE saving, but it relates to the FTE saving net of achieving a particular SLA with a cloud vendor, someone else managing infrastructure versus you managing it yourself. And a lot of those benefits are realized when you think of complex multi-tenant environments. If you can strip some of the unpredictable workloads off and put them in the cloud, then suddenly it becomes easier to manage an SLA across your organization. The 50 million cost avoidance is a big one, and this related to migration of apps into a purely cloud-native architecture. So we worked with this customer to understand what it means to lift an app that you're currently running on-prem, be that in Spark, Hadoop, a mix of the whole thing, and lift that and re-platform that into EMR or HTI and Glue and all of the different services you'd need to architect that in a cloud vendor solution. The estimated cost was actually $2.5 million per app for this particular customer and the particular cloud vendor they were moving to. And that isn't just the rewrite costs of rewriting the application itself, but more importantly, it was the testing costs, running duplicate infrastructure for a period of time for some of their most mission-critical workloads to test this, and the FTE cost of it. And this was a large customer, 6 lines of business, 5 to 10 apps in each. It soon adds up. And then finally, there's the risk mitigation. So this relates to operational risk, and this relates to easier ability to recover from performance issues by using elasticity in the cloud, and easier ability to architect a disaster recovery solution that wasn't reliant on one single point of failure. So you might say that you can get all of those benefits by moving fully to the cloud. And a lot of them, yes, you can. But we see there are a number of reasons for staying hybrid and thinking about it through a hybrid lens rather than just lifting and shifting and migrating full on into the cloud. Largely, there's cost effectiveness. So if you have an on-prem node, it costs the same regardless of how much you're using it. Broadly, yes, obviously there may be increased electricity costs, etc. But largely it is the same. Whereas for public cloud, you pay for what you use. So if you have heavily underutilized clusters, if you have 100 servers in your data center and you only ever need 100 for 1 day a week when you're running your peak workloads for reporting, and you'll use 10 the rest of the time, you're paying for that extra 90 all the time. So actually the optimization of on-prem for permanent and persistent workloads versus in the cloud for ephemeral workloads can lead to cost savings. But there are other big reasons for trying to maintain a hybrid cloud strategy. Number one, avoid vendor lock-in. You don't migrate fully to one of the cloud providers, re-architect into their solution, and once you've done that, you're stuck. You have built everything with their APIs, their point solutions pieced together, and it's very hard then to migrate into another cloud. That's not just an issue for not just an issue if you decide to switch fully to another cloud vendor, but cloud vendors have different global coverage. They have different levels of SLAs in different regions. And so actually being flexible in how you deploy and being able to deploy on-prem in cases where you don't have a public cloud provider who can offer you the infrastructure provides a lot of flexibility. There's also meeting regulatory requirements. There are a number of regulations in various countries where data has to be kept within a country, or you have to know exactly where the data is. And everyone knows a little bit about those. But actually one of the more interesting ones that's recently come up has been cloud concentration risk. So in financial services, the Bank of England released a report over summer stating that they were concerned that it was starting to become a systemic stability risk to the banking sector as a lot of the banks were migrating a lot of workloads onto 2 or 3 public cloud providers. Since then, the Financial Conduct Authority and Prudential Regulation Authority have taken an interest, and whether that's going to turn into full regulation or not, there's definitely an interest in that systemic risk from those angles. Greater flexibility. If you can deploy in multiple locations, you can get greater flexibility. That's pretty straightforward. And you can get a lot of the benefits of cloud without the high migration and lift and shift costs that we talked about. If you can, instead of just closing down all your data centers and migrating straight onto the cloud, which may be the cost-effective solution for some organizations, I agree. You can instead consider new workloads and bursting to cloud. You can get a lot of the benefits of cloud and that elasticity and agility and time to value without having to migrate everything. And then finally, the application costs, which we talked about, call that out again. So if you're convinced that hybrid is of interest now, the question is, how do you decide if it's right for you? How do you decide how to get there? So we use this approach to develop a hybrid cloud strategy. First thing is that we say you have to look at it use case by use case. Some use cases, unpredictable analytical workloads make complete sense to have fully in the cloud, whereas some of them, persistent, long-running, high-value use cases may make sense on-prem. So how do we look at this? There's on-prem, there's the hardware, and there's the costs of running a data center, and you can compare these nicely to the storage and compute costs and all the additional incremental small services you need for managing a cloud environment. But that's not the end of the story. You also have to consider the analytical software layer that you're using, and also how you're going to make sure you have governance and security. And that can be a real challenge or a real additional cost if you are starting to migrate into one or other cloud provider environment, or you focus solely on one environment, then you find you need to spin up another one. Because it's not you can solve this in a number of ways, either through business process, so operational overheads, or through software. And the tooling and business processes are different in both an on-prem world and a cloud world, and that can lead to a lot of additional complexity. Once you've looked at the individual use cases and where you think that they might strategically sit. Then we say you consider a consolidated view. This is looking at the overall operational overheads. And one particular one is whether you need multiple sets of skills. Okay, fine, I've gone to a hybrid cloud strategy, but now I need engineers who know how to use AWS services and engineers who can manage my on-premise state, so you've doubled my cost. Data duplication. Is it cost effective to have data in multiple places? Can you architect the use cases so that the on-prem ones are using one set of data and the cloud ones are using another? How do you decide about these things? So these are all considerations you need to think of holistically. Then there's data center utilization, so physical constraints. And then finally, there's the one-off costs. You know, if the benefits of migrating are small, the one-off costs may mean that it's not worth doing at that particular time. So, having now talked about how we might develop a hybrid cloud strategy, I'll talk a little bit about how we fit into this as Cloudera. So we see that there's a need to have applications that run anywhere, in any cloud, any environment, on-prem, and our platform enables you to do that. But it enables you to do that with a single unified layer of security and governance, which we call the Cloudera Shared Data Experience, SDX. That sits in the middle and avoids the additional overheads and costs that we saw for security and governance. Then you also have the data cataloging, workload manager, replication manager. Data cataloging avoids you reintroducing data silos from multiple clouds. You know where your data is all the time, everywhere it is. And then finally, it's open, so it integrates well with the ecosystem and enables you to build on any tooling that you might need and use for your applications. So that's all I really have to say. I'd like to take any questions you might have either as a group, or if you'd like to come and speak to me at the end, I'd be very happy to talk to you more about how we've done this with various customers. Thank you.